Some encounters in life aren't planned. They're destined. A man who had everything, money, power, fame, yet lived alone in a sleepless city, and then, a single glance, a tiny hand reaching out through the dust of the streets, made his heart beat for someone who shared no blood with him. This is not just a story about a billionaire and a little beggar girl, it's a journey of love, of choices, and of a heart discovering what family truly means. If you love touching, deeply human stories like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming emotional journeys. Now, let us take you into a choice within the heart, a story that will leave you speechless, smiling, and in tears. In the heart of glamorous New York City, where the lights never go out, there was a man whose power commanded admiration, John Whitaker, CEO of Everlight Holdings, a financial empire that even Wall Street watched with caution. He was the kind of man whose every move was tracked by the media, whose every word could shake the stock market, yet behind the dazzling lights was a cold, empty world. John lived alone in the tallest penthouse in Manhattan, where the only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner, the clink of glass, and the faint notes of classical music echoing from a surround sound system. No close friends, no family, no children. He chose solitude as part of success. There had once been a woman, but she had quietly walked away. He never stopped her, never explained. Love had never been something he believed he needed. Each night, John would stand by the massive glass windows, watching the busy streets below. Sometimes he wondered, even after reaching the top, why did his heart still feel so hollow? He had everything, wealth, power, fame, but he couldn't buy the simplest of things, a child calling him Dad, or a genuine hug. For John, life was about numbers, contracts, and endless business trips. Until one small encounter during a business trip changed everything. That day, John left New York to visit a distant suburb to evaluate a humanitarian investment project, something he usually left to his assistant. But this time, he wanted to go himself. The luxury limousine stopped on a dusty, quiet street. Outside, there were no gleaming glass towers, just sagging rooftops, broken fences, and a gray sky over a struggling neighborhood. As he was speaking to his team, John caught sight of a little girl, around 7 years old, wearing tattered clothes and messy hair, curled up under the awning of a small grocery store. She wasn't begging, just sitting there with an empty can, quietly watching every passerby. John glanced at her. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then he looked away. He had seen hundreds of such scenes. Why should this one matter? But as he was about to leave, he felt her eyes still watching him. Not with sadness or reproach, but with a quiet sense of waiting. A fragile glimmer of hope from the depths of despair. He turned back, and their eyes met, a silent gaze more powerful than words. Her name was Emma. John got into the car, shut the door, and the limousine slowly drove away. His assistant kept talking numbers and strategy, but John's mind was still back on that street corner. He didn't know why that child's eyes kept replaying in his head, eyes full of sorrow, but not yet broken. Eyes that stirred something deep in him. Something he didn't have a name for. Less than 2 minutes later, he said suddenly, "Turn around." His assistant blinked in surprise. "Sir, you have a meeting," but John repeated calmly, "I said turn around." The car turned, heading slowly back to that dusty street where the girl still sat in the same spot. Emma looked up, wide-eyed, not with hope, but disbelief. The man who had passed her by like everyone else had returned. John stepped out and walked toward her. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her quietly, then crouched down. He reached into his wallet, but stopped halfway. Not because of the money, but because something told him, money wasn't enough. "What's your name?" he asked. She whispered, "Emma." A simple name, but it made him smile. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded. He extended his hand, "Come have dinner with me." Emma hesitated, then gently placed her small hand in his. A thin, cold hand. But one that somehow warmed his heart. That night, after dining with Emma at a small diner, John didn't take her back to that awning. He booked a modest hotel room nearby and left her in the care of a trusted assistant. Emma slept peacefully in her first warm bed, while John lay awake, restless. He didn't understand what was happening inside him. A man who had always dismissed emotions now stared at the ceiling, wondering why he felt so unsettled. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about stocks, assets, or deals. He was thinking about a little girl. Emma didn't say much. Just that her parents had left long ago, and she survived on the kindness of strangers, but never begged the same person twice. "I don't want to bother anyone," she had said. The words cut deep. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the hotel window, John made a decision that stunned both his assistant and driver. He wanted to adopt Emma. "Sir. Are you sure?" You're right." John interrupted. "I've never wanted to be a father. But maybe it's time I learn." He said no more. But his eyes, after all these years, held a light that no penthouse chandelier could replicate, the light of newfound purpose. When the grand gates of the mansion opened, Emma held tightly to John's hand, her wide eyes gazing at the fairy tale-like house. Everything was unfamiliar: gleaming marble floors, spiral staircases, a bedroom with windows overlooking the city. But what struck Emma most wasn't the luxury. It was the soft bed and the small teddy bear placed at the head. Like someone had known she was coming, John stood at the door, watching Emma slowly step inside. He didn't know what to say. This wasn't a contract. There were no clauses, no returns. Just a little girl. And a man who had never met her before, but somehow, fate had brought them together. Emma didn't ask why he chose to adopt her. She simply said softly, "Thank you." John nodded, quietly turning away to hide his tear-filled eyes behind dark glasses. The early days were anything but easy. Emma was shy, John was clumsy. He didn't know how to care for a child. She didn't know what it felt like to have someone waiting for her at dinner. But little by little, with every morning filled with laughter, every awkward hug, every time John knelt down to tie her shoelaces, something changed. Neither of them said it, but both were slowly learning to belong to each other. A new journey had begun, not one of wealth or power, but one of love. From the day Emma stepped into her new life, John devoted all his free time to caring for her. He had someone research and select the best private school in the city, one that focused not only on academics, but also on emotional development and character building. Emma wasn't pressured to become a perfect child or meet unrealistic standards. She was simply allowed to be herself. John hired a private tutor for the evenings when Emma struggled to keep up with her studies. But what touched her most wasn't the material comforts. It was the look in his eyes when he waited outside the school gate, the way he baked a cake by himself for the first time to celebrate her very first day, even though half the cake was burnt black. Gradually, John learned to listen, to ask questions instead of giving commands. He read books about parenting, quietly took notes about her preferences, from her favorite food to her favorite color. The evenings in their large house were no longer silent, but filled with piano melodies, bedtime stories, and the sound of laughter, though still a child. Emma deeply felt that love. She began calling him Daddy, at first shyly and hesitantly, then with warmth and ease. John didn't say a word, but for the first time, he touched his chest where his heart ached, not from pain, but from overwhelming joy. John never taught Emma through stern lectures. He taught by example, waking up early even when he was tired, keeping promises even if it was just a picnic, always saying thank you to the servers. Emma grew up in comfort, but her soul remained humble and grounded. She never boasted about living in a mansion or having a father who was the CEO of Everlight Corporation. At school, she made friends with genuine kindness. Many were surprised to learn Emma was the adopted daughter of a billionaire. Because she never used that fact to gain an advantage, Emma studied on her own initiative, never needing reminders. On nights when John saw her reading late into the evening, he didn't interrupt. He just quietly left a small piece of cake next to her glass of milk. Emma understood that success didn't come from privilege, but from daily effort. When people called her Everlight's golden girl, Emma simply smiled and said, "I'm just trying to be worthy of Daddy's love." John often asked himself, who's raising whom in this relationship? Because it seemed like he was the one being taught how to live kindly and sincerely by Emma. That winter, Emma suddenly came down with a high fever. She lay unconscious for a whole day, not eating or drinking, occasionally whispering Daddy in her sleep. Even though John was in an important meeting with European partners, he dropped everything and rushed home. He held Emma in his arms, his hands trembling with a fear he had never known. Not the fear of losing a contract, but the fear of losing that tiny life he loved more than himself. All through that night, John never left her bedside. He stayed there, gently placing cool towels on her forehead, whispering clumsy words of comfort. Whenever he dozed off for a moment, he'd wake in panic to check her temperature. For the first time in his life, John felt helpless, because money meant nothing in that moment. Only love and patience could soothe the storm. The next morning, when her fever broke, Emma opened her eyes slightly and asked, "Daddy, didn't you have a meeting?" John took her tiny hand and whispered, "Not more important than you." That answer became a defining moment in their father-daughter bond. From that day on, Emma never hesitated to hug him each morning before school, and John always waited at the gate every afternoon, rain or shine. Longtime employees at Everlight began to notice something strange. CEO John Whitaker, once so cold and intimidating he could silence an entire boardroom, now smiled. Not only smiled, but also asked about employees' lives, sometimes even telling stories like, "My little girl just baked cookies for me." John no longer lived only within spreadsheets. He came home earlier, spent weekends on picnics with Emma, tried cooking, took piano lessons. And most importantly, he learned how to express love. Not through extravagant gifts, but through time, presence, and gentle eyes. His smile grew more natural, his gaze softer. Even the way he spoke in meetings became less sharp, more understanding and compassionate. Employees whispered to one another, "Emma is his miracle." John once believed happiness was the result of success. Now he knew success meant nothing if there was no one to share it with. And he thanked life every day for bringing Emma to him, to teach him how to become whole. At 22, Emma stood on the graduation stage, holding her degree in sociology and community development with highest honors. The auditorium erupted in applause, but John's eyes welled with tears when she took the microphone and said, "I don't have my biological parents here today. But I have a father who chose me with his whole heart." Emma didn't immediately join Everlight. She chose to work as a volunteer for a non-profit supporting street children, the very place she once came from. John didn't object. He simply said, "Live in a way that makes you proud of yourself." Even when stepping into a demanding world, Emma kept her heart pure. She worked tirelessly, traveling, listening, sharing, and building community education programs. Whenever she felt worn down, she'd call home and hear John's voice, "Coming home for dinner, sweetheart." She never forgot where she came from, or who gave her a second life. In a world that insists on blood ties to define family, John and Emma proved the opposite. Their father-daughter bond didn't need DNA to be valid. It was confirmed by their days together, their hugs, their tears, and their warm meals. John no longer referred to Emma as "my adopted daughter." In every conversation, he proudly said "my daughter," with a loving glint in his eyes. And Emma, even as an adult, still crawled into his lap on cold, rainy nights, just like she did as a child. They had walked a long journey, from strangers to a bond of deep connection. They became family not because of law, but because their hearts had chosen each other. Life passed peacefully in the villa covered with greenery, where Emma's laughter echoed and John's gentle eyes lingered. After so many years together, the words adoptive father and adoptive daughter no longer existed between them, only unconditional, genuine love remained. Every morning, John still sat on the balcony, reading the newspaper, waiting for Emma to bring him a hot cup of coffee, a familiar ritual between father and daughter. Emma had just graduated with honors and received many offers from major nonprofit organizations. But she always returned to John, always placed family, the place her heart belonged, first. They lived as if those calm days would last forever, like a family fate had granted each other, late, but complete. Some evenings, John would look at Emma and smile, "If there's a next life, I hope to meet you again at some crossroads and bring you home, just like that day." Emma would only smile, resting her hand on his shoulder. "I don't need a next life, because the present is already the most beautiful gift." But then, like life's cruel law, peace is often just the quiet before the storm. Tragedy doesn't announce itself, doesn't knock, doesn't ask permission. It came on a rainy day, shattering the clear glass of happiness. And this time, it was Emma who had to choose how to move forward, between two voices calling her, one from a distant past, and one from a heart forever intertwined with hers. That day, a light rain fell, and mist blanketed the winding roads of the suburbs. John had just returned from an inspirational talk about education for orphans, where he had spoken proudly about Emma. On the way back to the city, the sleek black limousine lost traction as the driver swerved to avoid a truck ahead. In a split second, everything spun out of control. The sound of metal crashing, glass shattering, and then an eerie silence. The news of the accident struck Emma like lightning. She was at the office of the charity Lumos Future, where she had just accepted a job offer, when she got the call. Her heart clenched. Without even asking for details, she rushed out of the room, hailed a taxi, and headed straight for the Central Hospital, ignoring the storm, ignoring everything else. When she arrived, she saw John lying still on a stark white bed, his face pale and lifeless. The doctor said, "He suffered a severe spinal injury. I'm sorry, but from the waist down, he'll have no sensation." Those words hit Emma like ice water to the heart. She couldn't believe it. That resilient father, the man who had lifted her from the depths of society, now had to endure such cruel pain. John opened his eyes after 2 days in a coma. He saw Emma, still there, holding his hand, eyes red from crying. He tried to smile, but tears slipped from the corners of his eyes. Daddy's sorry. I won't be able to take walks with you anymore. Emma broke down, shaking her head. No, Daddy. From now on, I'll push your chair. Every day. I promise. From that day on, she turned down every job offer, every attractive opportunity. Emma stayed home, learned how to care for a paralyzed person, studied medical documents, monitored every breath, every sudden pain John experienced. She rearranged the house, installed handrails, even hired a physical therapist to come home, just to give him a sliver of hope for partial recovery. At first, John resisted. He felt like a burden, unable to accept that Emma, the girl he once cherished and built a future for, was now giving up everything just to care for a disabled old man. But Emma never gave up. Every night, she sat by his bed, told old stories, read to him, and held his cold hand that had gone numb with despair. And slowly, John began to smile again, though weakly. Because he knew, in this world, who else could love him like this but the daughter he had once saved? And who now, in turn, was saving him from the abyss of pain and uselessness. Since the accident, Emma had spent nearly all her time by John's side. Every morning, she made coffee, helped him sit up, combed his hair, just like he used to do for her on their way to school. Now the roles had reversed, but the love remained unchanged, only patience and gratitude grew stronger with time. Emma declined the managerial position at Lumo's Future, despite the high salary and career prospects. Everyone was surprised, but she simply said, "My father needs me more." Every word she spoke revealed her genuine affection. To Emma, success was no longer about titles or awards, it was about seeing John smile every day. John slowly shifted from shame to being deeply moved. He watched Emma carefully perform every task, every meal, every gentle stroke of his hair when he couldn't sleep. He had once saved a beggar girl. But now, that very girl was saving him from the emptiness of old age, illness, and the fear of abandonment. Emma learned to use lifting machines, practiced physical therapy techniques, and even redesigned the house to accommodate his disability. She never once complained. On the contrary, every time she saw John smile faintly after a therapy session, her eyes lit up like a little sun. Father and daughter love needs no grand words. It exists in every touch, every gentle glance, every sleepless night by the hospital bed. The scars in their hearts, though born of different pasts, were now being healed by the very love they shared with one another. One peaceful afternoon, while John was napping and Emma was watering the garden, the doorbell rang. A middle-aged couple, modestly dressed, their faces filled with worry, stood close together at the gate. "Excuse me. Is this Emma's house?" The man asked, his voice trembling. Emma froze. They introduced themselves as Thomas and Margaret, her biological parents. Their faces bore a vague familiarity, their eyes held something both close and distant. "Back then. We were so poor, we couldn't raise you. For years, we searched everywhere, but no one knew anything. Until recently, we saw you in a newspaper article about a girl who overcame her fate." Emma couldn't speak. She stood silently, stunned. Faded memories surged back like a flood, cold, hungry nights beneath a bridge, the desperate pleas in the streets, the hopeless gaze of a child abandoned. The people in front of her, they were her flesh and blood. Yet they had once turned their backs on her. They cried as they recounted their long search, their guilt, and the pain of losing their child for 20 years. They hadn't come to apologize with words, but with eyes filled with regret. Emma sat quietly. She didn't cry. But inside, her heart was a storm of confusion. You don't have to forgive us. But we beg for just one moment, to look at you, to call you our daughter, just once in this lifetime. Margaret choked through her tears. The father sat silently beside her, eyes red, bony hands clenched tightly. Emma looked at them, heart full of conflict. She thought she no longer needed answers from the past. But now, standing face to face with them, old questions resurfaced. Why did you abandon me? Why are you only coming now? Can blood ties ever return to what they were, as if they were never broken? John learned of the visit. He said nothing, just sat quietly in his wheelchair, watching Emma with a calm, thoughtful gaze. No anger. No selfishness. Only a quiet fear, that Emma's heart might be torn between two worlds, the ones who gave her life, and the one who raised her with his whole life. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She stood before the small altar, where a photo of her and John at her graduation sat. Her heart was tangled like a knotted thread. Blood may be irreplaceable, but can abandonment be healed by an apology? And if she turned her back on John, the man who sacrificed everything for her, would she still be herself? In the days that followed, Emma seemed like a ghost of herself. She spoke less, her gaze often distant. She began to avoid John, not out of resentment, but because she feared seeing the hidden sorrow in his eyes. She also avoided meeting the couple again, lacking the courage to face that painful past. She blamed herself for the confusion. Why can't I decide? Why am I so weak? But the heart is never fair, it doesn't choose right or wrong, it only chooses where it belongs. And Emma now stood between two shores, one of blood, one of love. John never pressured her. He only said gently, I won't hold you back. If you want to know them, I'll step aside. I just want you to be happy. But it was that very selflessness that pained Emma even more. She had never known a love that was so willing to sacrifice. One night, Emma stood in the room where John lay asleep, his motionless legs tucked under a thin blanket. She whispered, Dad. If you hadn't come back for me that day, I might have died in the street. I can't imagine this world without you. She bowed her head, tears falling, and in that moment, something inside her became clearer than ever. One cloudy morning in New York, the sky gray as if reflecting Emma's inner turmoil over the past weeks, she stepped into the living room. John sat by the window in his wheelchair, staring into the garden. She walked over and gently placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. Dad, she said softly, then knelt beside him, just like she used to when reading at his feet on quiet afternoons. John looked at her, eyes filled with tenderness and worry. Before he could say a word, Emma took his hand, the same hands that once held her through warm, childhood sleeps, and whispered through tears, I've thought about this for so long. Blood is something I'll always value. But the one who taught me how to live, how to love, is you. The one who gave me a second chance at life, is you. John said nothing. He just held her hand tightly, trembling. For the first time in his life, he cried openly. Emma said she had met her biological parents, had listened to them, and had forgiven them in her heart. But her heart had made its choice, to stay with the father who had weathered every storm by her side. I can forgive the past. But I cannot walk away from the present, where you are. That day, Emma arranged to meet her biological parents at a small cafe. She brought a photo of her and John smiling brightly at her graduation. She placed it on the table and gently said, I'm no longer the girl who was abandoned. I grew up in love. And I'm grateful to you for giving me life, but I cannot go back." The elderly couple sat in silence. They didn't blame her. They just lowered their heads, tears falling, holding her hands in quiet acceptance. "We'll always watch over you." From afar, her father said, "Live a happy life. That's all we ever hope for." Emma returned home just as the sun dipped below the horizon. She walked into the room and saw John dozing in his chair. Gently, she pulled a blanket over his legs and whispered, "I've come back. Not just because I'm your daughter, but because you've been everything to me." From that day forward, Emma was no longer torn. She lived with calm and strength. In her heart, there was both the bond of blood, and something even greater, a love that was chosen, and sometimes, that choice is what truly makes a family. After that day, when Emma returned to John, everything seemed to have settled. But deep inside, countless silent waves still stirred within her. She had made her choice, but nameless questions continued to linger in her heart. On long, quiet nights, Emma would often sit by her bedroom window, staring at the flickering stars, wondering, who am I really? Where do I belong? The return of her biological parents had stirred up forgotten memories, old wounds and new aches of compassion. And standing at the crossroads of emotions, Emma knew, she needed a moment of silence. Emma was no longer the naive little girl of the past. She was mature enough not to rush into any impulsive decisions. In the weeks that followed, she observed quietly. Looking into the wrinkled, regretful eyes of her birth parents, she saw genuine remorse, a sadness that had stretched over the years they had lost their daughter. But whenever she turned to look at John, sitting in his wheelchair, his gentle eyes following her every step, Emma felt a lump in her throat. He had never demanded, never blamed. He was simply there, offering a love as solid as a house that could never fall. She began to write in her journal again. Her trembling words were like self-reflection. Can blood ties truly erase all the pain of the past? Or is it the love we nurture that forms the true roots of a real family? Day by day, Emma quietly watched both sides. On one side, broken memories; on the other, memories built and filled with love. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves fell across the garden, Emma was helping John prepare tea. She was silent, her eyes tinged with sadness. John looked at her and placed his aging hand on her shoulder, a hand that had grown frail with time. He spoke in a warm, slow voice, "Emma, I have nothing to give you but love. And I never want you to feel indebted. If you find happiness returning to your birth parents, I will give you my blessing." Emma bit her lip, tears brimming in her eyes. She didn't realize how much that one sentence made her heart ache and admire him all at once. He didn't try to keep her with tears or guilt. He loved her in the noblest way possible, by letting her choose freely. That night, Emma sat alone in her room, her heart hollow. She wondered to herself, what kind of father is that noble? Who can love without holding on, care without asking for anything in return? That question was the key that opened the next door in her heart. It poured rain outside. Cold winds howled across the balcony. Inside, Emma sat still, holding an old wooden box. Inside were keepsakes she had treasured for years, a wool scarf John wrapped around her on their first winter together, a handwritten letter he gave her when she entered college, the slanted handwriting full of emotion, a tiny bracelet, the first birthday gift he ever gave her, along with a message, "Because you deserve to be loved." Memories played like a slow-motion film. She remembered the first night she slept in the warm room of the mansion, when John quietly sat outside the door, afraid she might be scared. She remembered the time she had a high fever, shivering, and John had carried her, running to the hospital, tears streaming down his face. Those memories weren't just the past, they were proof of a deep, quiet love, one that needed no title. And Emma knew. Only a true father could give her such unconditional affection. After many nights of thought, Emma realized she could no longer live torn between two sides of her heart. She didn't want to hide. Didn't want to stay silent. She needed to face everything, not just her birth parents, but herself. One weekend afternoon, Emma called her biological parents. Her voice was calm, but inside, 1,000 emotions twisted. She invited them to the mansion, the home she had lived in for years with the adoptive father who had changed her life. That day, the atmosphere felt frozen. Emma's birth parents sat across from John. The room was so still, it felt like no one dared to breathe. Emma sat in between them, her eyes sad but determined. She spoke slowly. I didn't call this meeting to blame anyone, but to listen, to understand, and to forgive. The conversation unfolded in tears. Her birth parents spoke of years of hardship, of the helplessness, not heartlessness, that led them to abandon Emma. They wept, while John sat silently, as if giving Emma the space to feel and choose. In the end, there was no more resentment, only compassion. But she couldn't forget all that John had done for her through the years. And in that moment, as the three of them sat together, she understood, truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be spoken from the heart. After a long silence, Emma walked over to John. He was still there, calm, kind, his eyes full of understanding. No pleading. No desperation. Just a quiet presence, as he had always been. Emma knelt down and took his frail hand. She looked directly at her biological parents and said, voice choked with emotion, "Thank you for giving birth to me. But this is my real father." That sentence echoed in the quiet room like a bell, not loud, but deep enough to touch the soul. Her birth parents wept. They lowered their heads, not in defeat, but in understanding. Love doesn't only come from blood, but from the way someone chooses to love and sacrifice. John, too, couldn't hold back his tears. He pressed his lips together, his hands trembling as he held Emma's. In that moment, he was no longer a billionaire, no longer the CEO who once shook Wall Street. He was simply a father, finally acknowledged by his daughter with all her love and trust. Emma stood up and went to her birth parents. She embraced them, gently. No more anger, no more blame. Just a hug, long enough to say, "I forgive you." And in her eyes was maturity, the heart of someone who understood what it means to forgive in order to move forward. She said, "Don't be sad. I'll keep in touch. I still want to know how you're doing. But my home, my heart, has long belonged to Dad John." No one said anything more. The atmosphere was heavy, yet no longer burdened, only peaceful, like the calm after a storm. After that day, life returned to its usual rhythm. John still sat in his wheelchair, still enjoyed reading in the garden. Emma once again pushed him on their morning walks. And the two laughed like nothing had ever happened. But in their hearts, everything had changed. That father-daughter bond, after the trial, had only grown stronger and more sacred than ever. Life, after great upheavals, often brings a stillness, a space where people learn to breathe slower, live more gently, and love more deeply. After Emma chose to stay with John, the atmosphere in the villa changed. it became lighter, more peaceful, filled with a kind of love that no longer needed to be proven, because it had been etched into their hearts through time and trials. Emma could never forget the emotional look in John's eyes the day she signed the legal adoption papers. Though he had loved her as his own daughter for years, to her, this was something that had to be done, not only to formalize their relationship, but to honor the great man who had walked with her through the longest stretch of life. John was stunned when he heard the news. "You don't have to do this, Emma. I've never needed a piece of paper to know you are my daughter," he said, his voice trembling, but Emma simply smiled, her eyes shimmering. "I know. But this is my gift to you, so the world knows it too." The procedure was completed quickly thanks to their status and complete documentation. But to Emma, every word on that certificate wasn't just legal, it was flesh and blood, memories, the midnight hugs, the worried glances when she was sick, and the hands that had led her through the darkest days. On the day she received the official document, Emma cried. Her new name was now Emma Willow, bearing John's last name, as a way to bind them together forever. She quietly pressed the paper into a memory album, placing it next to the first photo taken with John when she was just a skinny, teary-eyed little girl. John didn't say much, but that day, he held her hand and hugged her for a long time. For him, it wasn't just about legal recognition, it was a silent thank you, that even though life had once been cruel, it had given him a miracle named Emma. After everything settled down, Emma began to think ahead. On long nights sitting by the window, she often recalled her former self, huddled on a street corner, trembling hands stretched out for a piece of bread. If John hadn't come along that day, where would she have ended up? That question drove her to act. She didn't want her story to be a rare miracle, she wanted it to inspire love, to ignite kindness. And so, the Emma John Foundation was born, carrying the mission of helping orphans and abandoned children across America. On the foundation's launch day, Emma wore a simple dress and stood on stage with John beside her. "I was once a homeless child," she said, "but someone didn't just give me a home, he taught me how to love, how to believe in myself. Today, I want to carry that flame forward." John looked at her, gently squeezing her hand. He didn't need to give a speech, because his eyes said it all: pride, gratitude, and a deep, enduring love. The foundation quickly spread far and wide. Hundreds of children were brought into shelters, fed, educated, and emotionally healed. Every time Emma visited a center, she knelt to meet the children at eye level, shared her story, and said, "If I could do it, so can you." John was no longer the powerful CEO of Stoneheart Corporation. Now, he lived a quieter life, with his wheelchair as his constant companion. But that didn't dim the sharpness in his gaze, nor the vastness of his heart, especially when he looked at Emma. Each morning, he would sit on the porch, holding a cup of coffee, quietly watching news about his daughter, from speeches and interviews to short clips. He saved every one. His study was now filled with photos of Emma, moments of her smiling, helping others, or shedding tears during emotional stories. Whenever Emma returned from a trip, she would recount every little detail, from a strange dish she tried in a small town to a child hugging her tightly for having a bed for the first time. John listened to it all, eyes shimmering as if reliving life through her words. Once, Emma asked, "Do you ever regret giving up your empire?" John simply laughed, "I didn't give anything up. I just moved my investment, from stocks to a heart of gold." To him, Emma was the greatest investment of all. Though his legs could no longer move, every one of Emma's achievements was a proud step forward in his life, the strides of a father who chose love and never once regretted it. After the years of fame and tears, John and Emma chose a peaceful, simple life on the outskirts of New York, where the morning sun was gentle and trees cast soft shadows in their little garden. Their home wasn't large or luxurious, but every corner radiated warmth and belonging. Though in a wheelchair, John woke up early every day with Emma to brew tea, read the news, and talk about everything, from current events to the psychology book Emma just bought. They didn't mind arguing over a life philosophy, only to burst out laughing over a witty remark. Together, they planted flowers, grew vegetables, and gave names to each pot like spiritual children. Each plant marked a memory. This lavender, the day you fell but still insisted on planting it, John laughed, and that rose, the day we fought and made up. In the evenings, they sat side by side watching old videos, short clips Emma recorded as a child, John's first attempt at cooking, or handwritten letters he never sent. These moments lit up their little house with memories and love. They didn't need glamorous parties or fame. What they had was a home, two people, and a love that could never be measured by time or money. Though living humbly, Emma continued to shine in her own way. Newspapers called her the girl from the sidewalk who rose to the top, but Emma never saw herself as special. She was simply someone who had been given a chance and now wanted to give it back. She never stopped learning, growing, and spreading kindness through speeches, community projects, and youth gatherings. Success isn't where you were born, she often said, but how you choose to live. On social media, Emma didn't post designer outfits or luxury vacations. Instead, she shared stories of the children helped by the foundation, or memories of cooking soup for John when he had a cold. She became a symbol, not just of success, but of gratitude and resilience. Many saw themselves in her, someone who was once lost, but never gave up. John followed every step of that journey with proud eyes. "I used to think I was the one who saved her," he said in an interview. "But now I know, she's the one who saved me." After all, Emma's biological parents, the Donovans, remained in touch. At first, they appeared filled with guilt and kept to the edges of her events. But it was Emma who walked toward them first, offering gentle hugs, no blame, no anger. Emma understood that everyone has their own story, fears, mistakes, and regrets. Her parents had abandoned her, that was true. But they were also trying to make amends, and that too was a truth. She chose to see the good and begin again. John didn't object. On the contrary, he believed in the compassion he had nurtured in Emma. Afternoon tea now had 2 extra chairs, where her birth parents could sit and talk with John and her. Though some silences still lingered, they didn't replace each other, that much was clear. John was Emma's father, not just on paper but in her heart. But the Donovans were roots, a past Emma needed to embrace in order to truly grow. Once, when Mrs. Donovan gently placed her hand on Emma's and whispered, "I'm sorry for leaving you," Emma smiled, "I've been loved more than enough, Mom. I've already forgiven you." That was a moment no one in the house could hold back their tears. Time passed quietly, like the seasons of falling leaves outside the small house where John and Emma lived. After all the upheavals, ups and downs, and tears, John's life was slowly coming to its end. But this time, he was not alone. Each morning, sunlight streamed through the window of his room, where a wheelchair still stood beside an old bookshelf, and Emma's hand-knitted scarf hung at the head of his bed. Though John's health declined with age, he kept his nightly routine of reading with Emma, sipping herbal tea, and telling her stories of his youth, stories filled with glory, but also loneliness. The only difference now was the peace in his eyes. He looked at Emma as if reliving a life fulfilled. As though every beautiful thing in the world had been distilled into a love that required no blood relation. Emma saw it too. She knew her father was tired, but not sad, because he had once rescued her from a cold street corner, and now, she was the one warming his final days. Whenever someone asked John if he had any regrets, he would simply smile and say, "No. I only regret not meeting Emma sooner." Those words always made Emma embrace him tightly, as if refusing to let time steal her father away too soon, but both of them understood, everything must pass. Only love remains. John was always a quiet man, but his thoughts were as deep as the ocean, knowing he couldn't stay by Emma's side forever. He began writing a letter, not to leave instructions or distribute wealth, but simply to say thank you. In the quiet room, under the soft glow of a lamp, his trembling hand penned each word with immense love. "Dear Emma, thank you for walking into my life like a miracle I never dared to dream of." He recounted every moment, from the first time he saw the little beggar girl on the street, how her sorrowful eyes changed the cold world of a man who once thought money was everything. "I used to think I had it all, but truly, I had nothing until the day you called me Dad." He didn't dwell on illness or pain, only on the times they laughed together in the kitchen, the rainy days playing chess, and the day Emma skipped school just to bring him cold medicine during a meeting. The letter was gently folded and placed inside The Little Prince, the bedtime storybook they had read together night after night. John believed Emma would find it at the right moment, not too early to bring sadness, nor too late to bring regret. And in the final line, he wrote, "If there is another life, I still hope to be your father, not out of duty, but out of love." John passed away on a quiet autumn morning. Soft sunlight streamed through the window, casting a peaceful glow on his face. No fanfare, no extravagant flowers. Emma organized a simple farewell, just like her father, quiet but warm. The ceremony was held in the small garden behind the house, the very garden they once tended together. There were no long speeches, just a few wooden chairs, white chrysanthemums, and a small table holding a picture of John smiling gently, as if he were still among them, close friends, those he had helped. And children from the Emma John Foundation came, each sharing small stories that held a lifetime of meaning. A middle-aged man tearfully recalled how John offered help when he was unemployed. A girl who once lived in an orphanage sobbed as she remembered her first warm meal at John's home. An elderly man, eyes misty, shared the simple New Year's message John had sent him when he was in the hospital. Each story was like a puzzle piece, slowly revealing the portrait of a man who lived for others. Emma sat silently, listening. Her tears were no longer for loss, but for profound gratitude. She understood now. Her father, who once only cared about numbers and profits, had left behind the greatest legacy of all, love. After the farewell, Emma didn't rush back to business or the title of successful entrepreneur. Instead, she embraced a quiet period for her soul. She stayed in the old house, tending the garden John had loved, reopening his notebooks and writings from the last years of his life. In each page, she felt his warm presence, as if reminding her that life's purpose wasn't to become rich, but to spread kindness. She returned to the Emma John Foundation, but this time, not just to manage it, she lived it. She traveled to remote villages, met orphan children, single mothers, and abandoned elderly. She sat with them, listened to their stories, just like John had once patiently listened to hers. The foundation kept growing, but what made Emma proud wasn't the numbers on a report, it was the handwritten letters from children. "Thank you, Miss Emma, for my new school shoes. Thank you for the warm meal on a cold day." Or simply, "One day, I hope to be like you." Those words were the greatest reward, the truest gift John had left behind. Emma no longer needed the title CEO, nor the stage, nor pictures with celebrities. She found the most happiness wearing an old shirt, walking in the sun with a cloth bag of books and a heart full of love, just as her father had lived in his final years. That autumn afternoon, the sky was clear with gentle sunlight. Emma sat on the porch of their wooden house, the place where she and John had shared their most peaceful days. The house was old now, paint peeling, the wooden swing creaking in the wind, but she kept everything as it was. On the small table sat a hot cup of tea, an old book of John's, and a photo of the two of them on her graduation day. She gently touched the photo, fingers brushing across her father's kind face, that face, those eyes, etched into her childhood like a guiding light. In the past, looking at that picture made her cry. But today, a soft smile formed on her lips, a smile no longer filled with sorrow, but overflowing with gratitude. In that moment, memories came rushing back like a slow-motion film, from their first meeting on the street corner, to nights he carried her to the hospital, quiet afternoons reading under the porch, and the day he held her tightly as he signed the adoption papers. They were no longer haunting memories. They had become strength, a little flame that warmed her heart in moments of weakness. Emma whispered, "I miss you, Dad. But I know you never really left." She looked up at the endless blue sky, feeling a gentle breeze brush her hair. In that breeze, she swore she could hear John's laugh, warm and soft. And Emma smiled, a full, radiant smile, as if the whole world had just become whole. Time went on, and the little wooden house where father and daughter once lived became a place many came to visit, not because of its grandeur or historical significance, but because it held true love, a place where an unrelated father taught a lost girl how to love, live kindly, and become a light for others. Emma often sat writing under the porch, her hand caressing each word just as her father once taught her how to write her name. She began telling their story, not for fame, but to remind the world, love doesn't require blood, it only needs a sincere heart. Her book, Dad, the one who chose to love me, quickly spread, not because of popularity, but because it touched millions of hearts. In it, she wrote, "I was born twice. Once by the one who gave me life, and once by the one who chose to love me as his daughter, even without a drop of shared blood." From orphan classrooms to support centers for the disabled, the Emma John Foundation did more than offer aid, it sowed seeds of hope. Many said they could feel John in the way Emma smiled, gentle, warm. The love he left behind wasn't just a candle within her, it was a sun illuminating countless lives. And then, another autumn afternoon arrived. Children played in the yard, their laughter echoing across peaceful nature. Emma closed her eyes, breathing in the soft air. She knew her father was still here, in every leaf, every sunbeam, in every good deed she did, a love that never ended. The story ends, not with tears, but with a smile full of warmth, and one final message, like a breeze carried far: love doesn't need blood. It only needs to be chosen with all your heart. In a hurried world, where people often chase after the grand, some small stories hold extraordinary healing power. No shared blood, no title, just one hand reaching out at the right time, one heart big enough to love, can create a miracle. John and Emma, once strangers, found each other, and turned broken pieces into a home. True love doesn't need to be loud, it's quiet, like how John silently watched Emma grow. It's gentle, like the way Emma looked at her father on that final autumn afternoon. And it's strong, like the choice to stay, when life offered so many other roads. The story didn't end when John passed, it continues in every kind act Emma performs, in every child saved, and in every stranger who starts to believe in goodness again, because some love doesn't come from blood, it's chosen, and sometimes, the love that's chosen is the most sacred love of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Glow, where kind stories are told from the heart. Let's spread the message together. Love doesn't need conditions. It just needs to begin from a heart that knows how to love. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story, where the light continues to shine.